For your clinch fighting, having game basically means, do you understand how to control the position first? Just like in jiu-jitsu, in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, anybody that studied it knows position first is a basic rule. If you have the position, then you can strike, you can go for submissions. If you don't have position and you try and go for submissions or strikes, you're going to lose it. Well, it only makes sense that in the clinch range, because of the distance, the same principle applies. Here you see Randy Couture, who's an expert at this, working that pummel with Nathan from the gym. And that basic pummel, that's a drill you want to do for hours, learning how to control that position. When you dominate in position, you're going to dominate the clinch. You also need to know how to apply the basic striking tools from that range. The knee is a fundamental tool you want to be able to use at the clinch range. It's one of those tools that will put people away. Some excellent knees to the thigh, the head. We like to knee the body sometimes too, but when ground fighting is allowed, you have to be careful. The elbow is also a very crucial tool for your trapping range, for that clinch range. You want to learn how to use that when you're holding on to the guy, what we call attached hitting, and when you're not holding on to him. The elbow is another tool that'll just put people away. Headbutt, how to use it, when to use it. And then your Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu grappling, your ground game. If you don't have a ground game, as far as I'm concerned, you're not really going to be much of a fighter. The only way to develop a ground game is to spend thousands of hours on the mat wrestling against a resisting opponent like you see here. If you see a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt match, you're going to see the same arm locks that you see me use here. You're going to see the same triangles and the same chokes. You're not going to see him apply moves that the blue belts don't know. It's the same exact moves. It's just that they're applied much better and with much better timing. And that's because they've done it so many more times. Just like any other sport, any other athletic event. It's the timing. And the only way you're going to get the timing is from practicing like you see us doing here, by actually wrestling. You got to sweat, and there's no easy way to get there. You've got to be competitive. You've got to get into the gym. You got to throw away your ego, not worry about tapping. I tap all the time. Everybody at the gym taps. You got to not worry about looking bad in front of your students. If you're afraid to work out in front of your students because you're afraid they might beat you, then you might as well quit this profession as far as I'm concerned. Everybody's equal. There's no such thing as a sifu or a guru at our school, and everybody rolls. Everybody's got to wrestle. And that's the only way you're going to get better, and that's the only way you're going to confront your ego, and that's the only way that martial arts is ever going to help you become a better person. Developing that basic game.
It's hard for me to relate in any way, shape, or form with classical martial arts, and I'm not here to put anything down. People train for different reasons, and you have to decide what it is. You have to decide in your heart why it is you're doing martial arts, and then go from there. But for me, it's impossible for me to relate to the way they train, and likewise, I can imagine in some cases it's probably impossible for them to relate to the way I train. I just can't imagine it. So if you're not sparring, if you're not putting on the equipment and pretty much going full contact, you're not fighting, and you're not going to understand how to punch and kick. If you don't do boxing, you can't fight on your feet, as far as I'm concerned. I've never met anybody that could fight on their feet who had in one way, shape, or form done some boxing. By that I mean, of course, kickboxers, Muay Thai fighters, French savate guys. They can fight on their feet, but they don't have that boxing, structure. If you don't have that structure, I've never met anybody that didn't have that structure that could fight on their feet. If you don't understand clinch game, if you don't understand tie-ups, Greco-Roman, the takedowns, the double legs, the knees, the elbows, the way a wrestler does, or the way, in some ways, Muay Thai uses the knees, you can't fight in clinch range. And if you don't understand Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, as far as I'm concerned, you can't fight on the ground, or at least something that looks like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You may call it submission wrestling, but it still incorporates the guard, the mount, it's basically Jiu-Jitsu. So you can call yourself a martial artist, but it has nothing to do with fighting. So in that standpoint, it's impossible for me to relate, because I just don't think what you're doing is going to be effective. If you have a boxer that's got, let's say, 6 months in a boxing gym,
had maybe 2 or 3 amateur boxing fights. He knows, by and large, all the same techniques that Evander Holyfield knows, okay? Identical. If you take a high school Greco-Roman wrestler, he's going to know more or less all the same techniques that an Olympic level, world-class Greco-Roman wrestler is going to know. And if you take a good blue belt or purple belt, he's going to know all the same, and in some cases maybe even more techniques than a very good black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So the difference is not accumulation of techniques, it's the level at which those techniques are performed, and that's timing. And that's something that every single fighter on the face of this planet knows is true. When I say this, they know I'm telling the truth.
But as quickly as possible, we want to move people into having to move around, having to deal with a partner who's showing mitts, and them having to kind of adjust, because life isn't all nice and tidy. So it kind of is silly to train all nice and tidy, like boom, and just work set patterns. We try and keep things as unconventional and moving. And it's been very, I mean, it's great, because I think people feel very liberated when they realize it doesn't have to look super. It has to work. And if your premium is on how it works rather than how it looks, that's a big thing. And I think that's really our priority, is we want to make sure it works, not if it looks cool. I mean, Jackie Chan looks awesome. He really does. And I'm sure some of the stuff Jackie Chan does works. But the point is that we're not concerned about how it looks and if it's going to go on the silver screen. We're worried about, is it going to work for us when we're in a back alley or if we have to defend ourselves.
American. And in America, I consider myself a coach, and I consider my students athletes. And so they don't need to call me by a foreign title. And it also goes back to a basic philosophy we have at the gym. I don't believe that you should refer to somebody different because they're senior or junior to you. That comes from caste societies, Asian societies that had caste systems that I don't believe in. I mean, you have a beggar's humility and you have a warrior's humility. And a beggar's humility is going to be such that he's going to bow down and scrape the floor for anybody he deems to be better than him. But at the same time, he's always going to demand that anybody he deems inferior bow down and scrape the floor for him. You know, warrior's humility is such that he's not going to bow down for any man, but at the same time, he's not going to allow any man to bow down before him. And that's the kind of humility we want to have at the Straight Blast Gym. Because people like stuff that they don't understand. You know, they see Kung Fu series or something like that, and they want to be able to beat up 6 guys in the parking lot, you know, with a wave of their hand and not have to work very hard at doing it. And if somebody gives them some line about mystical, magical stuff, people want to believe that. And you can show them how it doesn't work. You can show them how it's impossible. You can show them that it's not logical. You can show them that it's asinine. You can prove it to them, okay? They're still going to want to believe in it. There's people that want to believe in the tooth fairy, and no matter what you do, no matter how many science classes they take, they're going to believe in the tooth fairy. And there's nothing you can do about that, and we don't want those people anyway. So, but I think that's a major attraction to Asian martial arts. There's a mystique attached to it, and you have to get past that and just start looking at it from the physics standpoint of body mechanics, timing, motion. A punch is a punch, a knee is a knee, an elbow is an elbow. It doesn't matter what part of the world it comes from. And that's how you have to look at things. And when you look at things in terms of tools, the way Bruce Lee talked about doing, you're going to get past and you're going to see through that haze of mystical bullshit.
I think that once you have a title, you have a fear of losing that title. And I've noticed that in my own self, although I've never achieved any greatness. I remember not long after I was made a black belt, I was very hesitant to wrestle with someone who I perceived as a threat. And although I always continued to train with anyone at any time, I felt the feelings, and I could see how in a classical style or without the drive to go through that, one could easily become stuck.
It's a vicious cycle, because what happens when you stop training and become a Sifu, okay, is you're going to have a position. Now I'm Sifu, and now I'm going to have to defend that position. And I'm going to stop training because I don't want to look bad, and I definitely don't want to look bad in front of my students. And since I've stopped training, in my mind, you can't fool yourself, and in my heart I'm going to know I'm not as good as some of my own students, so that some of these guys are going to be able to beat me at whatever, you know, I wouldn't look good. And so then that gives me even more reason not to train, and it becomes a vicious cycle. And what happens is martial arts, instead of being something that's good for people's personality, it becomes something that's bad for people's personality. And I've seen that firsthand with a lot of people, even in JKD. all of a sudden they become a sifu or a guru. They don't want to mix it up with their students. Their students have to stay aloof from their students, maintain a certain distance, because they want to put on airs that they're somebody that they're not. They foster the kind of attitude their students have that look at them as being more than human, and they foster that, and it's not healthy. It's not psychologically healthy for the guy that's the sifu, and it's not psychologically healthy for the guy that's the student. So the whole thing's kind of a sick, demented, sort of dysfunctional relationship that I don't want anything to do with. So that kind of, hopefully that answers your question.